I was branded an embarrassment at my sister's wedding. Then I took back the house and left for good. So my sister kicked me out of her wedding. She said, "I don't want you in my pictures. You have no class. Get out." She said this in front of all the guests. So I changed the locks on my house. And when she arrived, I told her, "I don't want you in my house. Get out." I'm Gabriel. I'm 32 years old. And although I don't like to brag, I can say that life has treated me well. I'm not a millionaire, but I've worked hard and invested wisely. I have 2 houses, one where I live, a simple but comfortable place, and another that I rent out for extra income. I'm not rolling in money, but I'm not struggling either. However, for my sister Juliana, that was never enough. To her, I was always a sort of walking failure, a constant reminder of what she considered undignified poverty, and that, believe me, was a daily occurrence. Juliana, my younger sister, was 28 and obsessed with pretending to be something she wasn't. She always wanted to live as if she belonged to high society, as if she were destined to rub shoulders with the rich and famous. But the reality was that she worked as a secretary in a law firm with a salary that barely covered her bills and maintained her high-class facade. She bought designer clothes on sale, bragged on social media about going to expensive restaurants, even if she only ordered an appetizer, and was always talking about how important it was to keep up appearances. To her, I was a disaster because I wasn't interested in that game. I preferred comfortable jeans, a cold beer with friends, and not spending money on things I didn't need. According to Juliana, that made me poor in spirit. Our parents, Carlos and Veronica, were always in the middle of this cold war between us. Dad was a quiet man, a retired worker who spent his days fixing things at home or helping the neighbors. Mom was more emotional, always trying to keep the peace in the family, though she sometimes ended up taking Juliana's side because, according to her, she's the youngest, and we have to understand her. I loved my parents, but it sometimes frustrated me that they couldn't see how unfair Juliana could be to me. It all started to get complicated a few months ago during a family lunch at my parents' house. It was a typical Sunday with the smell of sauce filling the house and the table laden with dishes Mom had prepared with love. The 4 of us were there, Dad, Mom, Juliana, and me. Everything seemed normal until Juliana, with that queenly expression she put on when she wanted to be the center of attention, dropped a piece of news that changed everything. "I'm getting married," she announced, raising her glass of juice as if she were in a movie. My parents stood up, filled with emotion. Mom almost cried, hugging her and saying how happy she was. Dad, more reserved, patted Juliana on the back and told her he hoped her fiancé, some guy named Esteban, was up to par. For my part, I smiled and offered a sincere congratulations. We weren't close, but it was an important moment for her, and I'm not one to ruin someone else's happiness. But then, as always, Juliana had to throw her dart. She glanced at me with that look of contempt I knew so well and said, "Gabriel, don't be offended, but I don't want you to come to the wedding." The silence that followed was like a bucket of cold water. My parents froze, looking at her as if they didn't understand. I felt a knot in my stomach, but said nothing immediately. I wanted to hear her excuse. "Why not?" Mom asked, clearly confused. Juliana sighed as if she had to explain something obvious. She said, "I don't want people to know that Gabriel is my brother. He doesn't fit the kind of wedding I want. She paused, searching for the words. "It's just that he doesn't look right, Mom. I don't want my friends and Esteban's friends to think we come from, well, a place like him." That hurt. Not because I cared what Juliana thought of me, but because she said it with such contempt, as if I were an embarrassment. Dad frowned and shook his head. "Juliana, that's not right. Gabriel is your brother. He's part of the family. You can't exclude him from something so important." Mom nodded, though you could tell she was uncomfortable. "He's your brother, Juliana. The family should be united. You can't do something like that." Juliana rolled her eyes as if my parents were overreacting. "Fine, fine," she said, raising her hands as if surrendering. "He can come, but he shouldn't expect me to treat him like the guest of honor. And Gabriel, please wear something decent. I don't want you showing up in your ripped jeans and that look of, well, you know." I didn't respond. I just nodded and continued, eating, though the chicken now tasted like nothing. My parents changed the subject, talking about the wedding details, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Juliana had said. It wasn't the first time she had treated me like I was less than her, but this time it felt crueler, more personal. A few days later, Juliana called me. It wasn't common for her to reach out, so I figured she wanted something, and I wasn't wrong. Her voice on the phone sounded sweet, but it was that fake sweetness she uses when she needs a favor. "Gabriel, I need you to help me with something," she said without even a greeting. "Esteban and I have nowhere to live after the wedding. All our money is going into the party, the dress, the catering, important things. Could we stay in one of your houses, the one you rent out, for example? I know it's vacant right now." I was silent for a moment. The house I rented out was an important source of income for me. It had recently become vacant, and I already had plans to look for new tenants. but despite everything, Juliana was my sister. I thought that maybe by helping her, we could improve our relationship. All right, I finally said. You can stay there rent-free at least for a while until you get on your feet. I expected a thank you, a minimal gesture of gratitude, but nothing. Juliana just said, "Perfect, give me the keys tomorrow." She added, "Oh, and another thing, Gabriel, please don't be in the wedding photos. I don't want you to be associated with me, it's not personal. It's just that I want everything to look elegant." There it was again. That contempt disguised as, "It's not personal." I felt a pang of anger but controlled it. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. "Fine, Juliana, I won't be in the photos." "Great, see you tomorrow then." And she hung up. Not a thank you, not a single acknowledgement. To her, it was as if I was obligated to do whatever she asked. In the following weeks, Juliana dedicated herself to transforming the house I lent her into her love nest. She bought new furniture, a huge bed, elegant curtains, lamps that looked like they were straight out of a decoration magazine. All with the little money she had left, or maybe with a Stabbins credit card, I don't know. Every time I stopped by the house to drop something off or check on a detail, I saw how Juliana was turning the place into her idea of a palace. She didn't ask for my opinion. She didn't consult me on anything. It was as if the house was already hers. Sometimes I wondered why I kept helping her. I guess deep down I wanted to believe that Juliana would change, that at some point she would see me as her brother and not as a nuisance. But every time I saw her with her sarcastic comments about my clothes or my way of life, I realized that wasn't going to happen. The wedding day arrived. I wore a suit I bought especially for the occasion. Nothing expensive, but decent. I wanted to respect Juliana's day, even if she didn't deserve it. When I arrived at the venue, an elegant hall with hanging lights and tables decorated with flowers, I saw Juliana looking radiant in her white dress. I approached her to say hello with a smile, hoping for at least some acknowledgement. "Hi, Juliana, you look amazing, congratulations," I said, trying to sound as sincere as possible. She barely looked at me, made a face as if my presence bothered her, and muttered a dry, "Yeah, I know," before turning to talk to someone else. I felt that pang again, but I told myself it wasn't worth taking it personally. It was her day. She was stressed, or so I wanted to believe. The ceremony was beautiful, though I didn't pay much attention. I sat at the back, away from the spotlight, trying not to make anyone uncomfortable. When it was over and the reception began, the atmosphere became more relaxed. There was music, laughter, food everywhere. I mingled with some cousins and uncles, chatting and laughing as if nothing was wrong. For a moment, I felt like everything was okay. Then came the time for family photos. The guests gathered around Juliana and Esteban, who were posing as if they were models from a magazine. My parents were there, smiling proudly. I stood to the side, remembering what Juliana had asked of me. I didn't want any trouble, so I discreetly moved away, watching from a distance. But my Uncle Roberto, a cheerful man who has always been like a second father to me, wasn't going to let me stay out. "Gabriel, get over here," he shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the group. "This is a family thing, we all have to be in it." I tried to resist, but he insisted, laughing and saying I couldn't be missing from the photos. Before I could protest, I was already in the group with my uncle on one side, my parents on the other, and my sister with her husband in front. The photographer took several shots, and I smiled, though I felt a knot inside. I knew Juliana wouldn't be happy. When the photos were done, Juliana went over to the photographer to review the images on the camera. I was talking to my uncle when I heard her. Her voice cut through the air like a knife. "What is he doing in there?" she screamed, pointing at me from across the room. Everyone turned. Juliana was red with rage, her eyes blazing. She walked towards me as if she were going to attack me. "I told you not to be in my pictures, Gabriel. You ruined everything, you useless oaf," she yelled so loudly that the guests stopped talking and silence took over the room. I tried to defend myself, staying calm. "Juliana, it wasn't my fault. Uncle pulled me in, I didn't." "I don't care," she interrupted, almost screeching. "I told you I didn't want you in them and you showed up. You're out of this party, Gabriel. I don't want you in my pictures. Get out." My parents tried to intervene. Mom told her to calm down, that it wasn't a big deal. Dad asked her not to exaggerate. Even my Uncle Roberto said something like, "Juliana, don't be like that. He's your brother." But she wasn't listening. She called security, and before I could process it, 2 guards were escorting me to the exit. The guests watched, some with surprise, others with discomfort. Juliana was still yelling at the photographer to delete the photos and take them again. I left the hall with my head down, but not out of shame. I was furious. I could feel the blood boiling in my veins. Never in my entire life had I felt so humiliated. And that's when I made a decision. Juliana had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I got in my car and drove aimlessly for a while, letting the fury settle. I didn't want to act on impulse, but I knew I couldn't just stand by. Juliana had taken advantage of me time and time again. I had lent her my house, a property that was a part of my hard work and effort, without asking for a cent. And instead of thanking me, she had treated me like a nuisance, as if I didn't deserve to be in her life. But that house wasn't hers, it was mine. And if she wanted to play dirty, I knew how to play too. That's when the idea came to me. I wasn't going to let Juliana and her new husband Esteban move into my house as if nothing had happened. Not after what she had done. I decided I was going to take back what was mine and in the process teach Juliana a lesson she wouldn't forget. That very night, instead of going home to feel sorry for myself, I called a trusted locksmith, a friend of many years who worked late. I explained what I needed, to change the locks on the house I had lent to Juliana and to do it quickly. He didn't ask many questions, just said he'd be there in an hour. Then I contacted a couple of friends who owed me favors, strong guys who could help me move heavy furniture. I told them it was an emergency, that I needed to get everything out of a house before midnight. They didn't ask for many explanations, just agreed to help me. We got to work. We took out the bed, the sofa, the table, the lamps, the curtains. It was all heavy work, but we did it quickly. Every time I moved a piece of furniture, I felt a little more relief, as if I were removing the weight of Juliana's scorn from my life. When we finished, the yard looked like an open-air warehouse. Furniture piled up, boxes with small things, even the pictures Juliana had hung on the walls. The house was left empty, just as it was before she set foot in it. My friend said goodbye, and so did the locksmith. I was left alone in the house, waiting. I knew Juliana and Esteban would arrive that night, probably after the wedding reception. She had told me they planned to start their married life in the house the next day, but I wanted to be there when they tried to get in. I wanted to see her face. I wanted her to know that this was the result of her actions. It was almost 11 p.m. when I heard the sound of a car parking outside. Then Juliana's screams broke the silence. "What happened here? What are my furniture and my things doing outside?" she yelled with a mix of disbelief and fury. I got up and walked to the window. From there I saw her running toward the pile of furniture in the yard, her wedding dress still on, though a bit wrinkled. Esteban, her husband, was by her side trying to calm her down, but she wasn't listening. She took out the keys I had given her and ran to the door trying to open it. She tried again and again, but nothing worked. Her voice became higher, more desperate. "It won't open! The keys don't work! What's going on?" she screamed, pounding on the door with her hands. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I opened the door and stood in the doorway, looking at her intently. Juliana froze when she saw me, her mouth open and her eyes full of rage. "What did you do, Gabriel?" she asked, almost spitting the words. "Why are my things outside? Why did you change the locks? This is my house." "This is not your house, Juliana," I replied, keeping my voice firm but calm. "It's my house. I lent it to you, and now I've decided not to lend it to you anymore." She took a step towards me as if she wanted to push me. "What are you talking about? We need this house. We just got married. You can't do this to us." "I can and I did," I said, crossing my arms. "You know why? Because I'm sick of your contempt. You humiliated me at your wedding, Juliana. You threw me out in front of everyone as if I were a stranger, as if I were worthless. You told me you didn't want me in your pictures, that I should get out. Well, now I'm the one who doesn't want you in my house. Get out." Juliana turned pale, and for a moment I thought she was going to faint. But then her face transformed into a mask of fury. "You're selfish," she screamed. "This is all because you didn't respect what I asked of you. I told you not to be in the photos and you did it anyway. You ruined my perfect day." "Your perfect day?" I repeated with a bitter laugh. "You know what, Juliana? I wasn't the one who ruined anything. It was my uncle who pulled me in for the photos. And instead of talking to me like a person, you humiliated me in front of everyone. You called security to have me thrown out like a thief. And now you come here to complain to me. You have no right." Esteban, who had been quiet until then, stepped forward. "Don't do this to my wife, Gabriel," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "This is low even for you." I looked at him without moving an inch. "This is my house, Esteban. You have no rights here. And if you want to defend someone, defend her from her own ego, because this is what happens when you treat people like trash." Juliana started to tremble, and suddenly her screams turned into sobs. She collapsed to the ground, still in her wedding dress, and began to plead. "Please, Gabriel, we have nowhere to go. We spent everything on the wedding. You can't leave us on the street. You're my brother, for God's sake." For a second, I felt a pang of guilt. Seeing her like that, crying with her makeup smeared and her dress dirty, was difficult. But then I remembered everything. The years of contempt, the biting comments, the humiliation at the wedding. I wasn't going to give in. "No, Juliana," I said in the coldest voice I could manage. "I'm not your brother only when it's convenient for you. You treated me as if I didn't exist, as if I were an embarrassment. Now you face the consequences. I don't want you in my house. Go." I closed the door in her face without looking back. I heard her screams from outside, her pleas, her insults. Esteban yelled something too, but I didn't pay attention. I sat on the floor of the empty house with the new keys in my hand and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I didn't want it to come to this, but Juliana had left me no other choice. That night, Juliana and Esteban stayed outside with their furniture under the light of a street lamp. I don't know how long they were there, but at 6 o'clock in the morning, when I looked out the window, I saw a moving truck parked in front of the house. A couple of men were loading Juliana's furniture while she and Esteban supervised with faces of defeat. Juliana and her husband left without looking back. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day my phone rang. It was my mom, Veronica. Her tone a mix of concern and anger. "Gabriel, how could you do that to your sister?" she said without even a greeting. "You left her on the street. She's your family." "Mom, I didn't leave her on the street," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I lent her my house, and she humiliated me at her wedding in front of everyone. I'm not going to let her treat me like I'm worthless." "She was stressed, Gabriel," Mom insisted. "It was her wedding, her special day. You have to understand her." "Understand her?" I repeated, feeling the anger return. "Mom, she kicked me out of her wedding like I was a stranger. She called security to have me removed, and now you're asking me to understand her? No, I'm tired of her contempt." Dad got on the call because they were on speakerphone. "Gabriel, what you did was wrong," he said in his usual serious voice. "Juliana and Esteban had to sell the furniture they bought to pay for a room in a cheap place. Now they're struggling and it's your fault." "My fault?" I responded, feeling something inside me break. "And where were you when she humiliated me? Why didn't you say anything to her when she kicked me out of her wedding? You always defend her, always. But I'm your son too, and I'm tired of being the one who always gives in." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mom started to say something, but I cut her off. "I don't want to talk about this anymore. Juliana brought this on herself, and if you want to keep making excuses for her, that's on you." I hung up the phone and put it on silent mode. For the first time in a long time, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't just the relief of having said what I had been holding in for years, but something deeper. I had reclaimed something that Juliana, and in part my parents, had slowly taken from me. It wasn't just my house with its empty walls and new locks. It was my dignity, my right not to be treated as a nuisance, as a mistake that had to be hidden so as not to ruin the perfect image Juliana wanted to project. I made the decision to cut all ties with them. I didn't want any more of their judgments, their excuses, their favoritism. And now, months later, I can say that I am free. Looking back at the exact moment the moving truck disappeared around the corner, I realize now that it wasn't a victory lap. People often imagine these grand moments of standing up for yourself as cinematic, accompanied by a soaring soundtrack and a sudden magical sense of healing. But reality is far quieter and much heavier. As I stood in the doorway of my empty rental house, the chill of the early morning air seeping into my clothes, I didn't feel like a conqueror. I felt hollowed out. The adrenaline that had fueled my midnight eviction of Juliana and Esteban was rapidly draining away, leaving behind a profound aching exhaustion. I was 32 years old, standing in a house I owned, and yet I had never felt more orphaned. The silence that wrapped around the property was deafening, a stark contrast to the screaming, the pleading, and the bitter insults that had polluted the air just hours before. In the weeks that followed, the true weight of my decisions settled over my life like a thick fog. It is a strange, disorienting experience to mourn people who are still alive, people who live just a few miles away. Society conditions us with relentless platitudes. Blood is thicker than water. Family is everything. You only get one mother and one sister. Those phrases had been the invisible chains keeping me bound to a role I never chose, the family punching bag. I spent nights lying awake in my own bed, replaying the wedding reception over and over. I could still feel the heavy hands of the security guards on my arms. Still see the absolute disdain in Juliana's eyes as she ordered me out of her curated day. She didn't just want me out of a photograph, she wanted me erased from the narrative of her life because my reality, working hard, living simply, ignoring the rat race of high society, threatened her fragile illusion. But the memory that stung the most wasn't my sister's cruelty. Her vanity and entitlement were entirely predictable. Once you see the pattern, you know exactly how the person will behave. The true heartbreak, the betrayal that kept me staring at the ceiling in the dark, was the passive, enabling silence of my parents. When Juliana ordered me thrown out, my mother and father stood there. They murmured weak protests, sure, but they didn't leave with me. They stayed, they ate the catered food, and they smiled for the remaining Gabriel-free photos. They chose the aesthetic of her wedding over the dignity of their son. And later, their first instinct wasn't to ask how I felt after being humiliated in front of 100 people. Their instinct was to scold me for disrupting the peace, for making Juliana uncomfortable. Recognizing that your parents love the convenience of your compliance more than they love your actual soul is a grief that completely reshapes how you view the world. Unpacking decades of familial conditioning takes time, and the process is rarely linear. There were days when the guilt threatened to consume me. My phone screen would light up with missed calls from my mother, voicemails from my father demanding I be the bigger person, and text messages from extended relatives who had only heard Juliana's carefully constructed victim narrative. It took an immense amount of willpower not to cave, not to slip back into the comfortable, familiar skin of the compliant older brother who always absorbed the blow to keep the peace. I had to consciously remind myself that their definition of peace simply meant my silent suffering. They didn't want reconciliation, they wanted the old system back. Even Uncle Roberto, who had unwittingly sparked the explosion by pulling me into the frame, called me a week later. His voice was heavy with regret. He apologized for putting me in the crosshairs, but he also said something that stuck with me. "Gabriel, you can't fix a foundation that was built crooked." He was right. The foundation of my relationship with Juliana wasn't just crooked, it was rotting. That rental house became more than just a source of income. It became the physical manifestation of my boundaries. When I changed those locks, I wasn't just locking Juliana out of a free ride, I was locking out a lifetime of disrespect. The sheer audacity she displayed, standing in her wrinkled wedding dress, pounding on the door of a house she didn't own, furious that the brother she had just publicly disowned wouldn't fund her new life, was staggering. But it was also the exact clarity I needed. It crystallized the reality that Juliana didn't love me. She loved my utility. She loved what my bank account and my labor could provide for her. And the moment I stopped being useful, I became disposable. Recognizing that your sibling views you as an ATM rather than a human being is a brutal heartbreak, but it is also the key to absolute freedom. Learning to live in that freedom has been a journey of rediscovery. I had to learn how to exist without the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that always accompanied family interactions. I realized that for my entire adult life I had been bracing for impact, waiting for the next snide comment about my clothes, the next demand for a favor, the next eye roll when I spoke.
The absence of that tension felt unnatural at first. My house was so quiet, but slowly the quiet turned into peace.
I started filling my time with people who actually valued my presence, friends who didn't care if we drank cheap beer in the backyard or wore mismatched jeans. I rented the house out to a lovely young couple who treat the property with respect and pay their rent on time. Every time the deposit hits my bank account, I feel a quiet nod to my own hard work, a reminder that I built this life with my own two hands. I don't harbor explosive, fiery anger toward Juliana, Esteban, or my parents anymore. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It only rots you from the inside out. Instead, I feel a detached, protective apathy. I wish them well in whatever life they are building, but I will not be a part of it. I have accepted that to them, I will forever be the villain in their story, the selfish brother who ruined a marriage before it even began. I am perfectly okay with that. If being the villain is the price of keeping my dignity, it is a price I will gladly pay. Sometimes, the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the people who share your DNA. We are taught to forgive, but forgiveness does not require reconciliation. You can forgive someone from a distance. You can wish them peace while refusing to let them disrupt yours. My life today is simple, but it is entirely mine. I built it with my own effort, I protect it with my own boundaries, and I share it only with those who look at me and see a person, not a resource. The locks have been changed. The keys are in my pocket, and the door to my past is finally, permanently closed. The story may have ended, but its aftermath opens up a larger discussion about the true boundaries in relationships. At its core, this conflict was never truly about a wedding, a house, or even a single moment of humiliation. It was about a long-standing imbalance quietly tolerated in the name of family. Too often, society teaches us that keeping harmony means staying silent, that being the good sibling means enduring disrespect, and that sacrifice is proof of love. But when one person is always expected to bend, to give, and to accept less dignity than they deserve, that harmony becomes nothing more than a well-decorated illusion. Juliana's behavior did not appear overnight. It was shaped and reinforced over time, by unchecked entitlement, by subtle parental favoritism, and by a culture that sometimes confuses image with worth. And Gabriel's silence, his willingness to keep giving despite the disrespect, also played a role in sustaining that cycle. This is how toxic loops form. One person takes, another endures, and the system stabilizes around that imbalance until something finally breaks. In this case, it broke publicly, painfully, and irreversibly. And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth I want to share with you. When I look back at this story, I don't see a man who destroyed his family. I see someone who reached a limit. I see someone who finally said, "This is where it stops." Because setting a boundary, especially after years of silence, will always look like aggression to those who benefited from your patience. It will feel harsh, even cruel, because it disrupts what others have come to expect from you. You might even question yourself in that moment. I did. You might wonder if you went too far, if you could have handled it differently, if kindness should have been extended one more time. But here's the reality. Boundaries are not punishments. They are corrections. They are the line between being part of a family and being used by one. And maybe the hardest part is this. Once you draw that line, things rarely go back to how they were. Some relationships fade. Some people refuse to understand. But what you gain, quietly and deeply, is something far more valuable: self-respect. The kind that no apology can replace and no approval can grant. So now, let me leave you with this. If standing up for your dignity means your family sees you as the villain, would you still choose to draw that line, or would you stay silent to keep the peace?